it is good for the members of the majority to see that society is not centered around them being white and that other people exist, and this is the thing they objected to.
A couple of weeks ago now, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey fired the early childhood education secretary. And Adam, you actually worked with this person during your time in the orbit of the Huntsville City Schools.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Dr. Barbara Cooper was the deputy superintendent of education in Huntsville City Schools for a few years. She actually worked under Casey Wardynski, and try not to hold that against her too much. I'll say that because I think she is as a professional and is a professional educator. But yeah, it's really an example of politics and ideology just getting in the way of education. That's what I see here. Governor Ivey has pushed her out, more or less has fired her, is my understanding, over quote-unquote woke concepts. The book is the National Association for the Education of Young Children, Developmentally Appropriate Practice Book, 4th edition. I know, sounds scandalous, right? It focuses on teaching children up to the age of 8. And right, this is a teaching book.
Like
children,
a book for teachers.
A book for teachers to learn more about teaching. It is not for children. It's not even for parents. It's for teachers. Very particular audience. I'm assuming it's, a college level kind of textbook. And yeah, it's just bizarre. It's bizarre, and it's shameful to see, that kind of politics interfere, because the early childhood department in Alabama has been highly acclaimed. The pre-K department or the pre-K program in Alabama has been, widely acclaimed and had very good results. And of course there's, critiques you can make of it, just like you can anything else. But by and large, it's been pretty successful, particularly, as a way to get kids caught up for kindergarten. It provides essential childcare for families who need the help. The biggest critique of the system is that it's not universal and it's not available for all children, but that's because the Alabama legislature, hasn't made it a priority to fund that. They could if they wanted to. But, back to Dr. Cooper, I worked with her and I found her to be a professional. Obviously her working under Casey Wardynski, we didn't see eye to eye. But, I never was, found her to be a disagreeable person. She was always very respectful. I think she knew her stuff. I think she's a person that has always tried to work inside the system. One of those kind of educators, and, has kind of worked their way up the ranks, doing that. There are drawbacks to that, and I think she's lived it, because the Wardynski people turned their back on her in Huntsville when everything hit the fan with him, and he made his hasty resignation. They tried to pin a lot on Dr. Cooper because she was there, right? She was the deputy, and she still hadn't resigned yet. And here we see, white conservatives stabbing her in the back yet again. And so that's sad. And it's just sad that developmentally appropriate pedagogy, teaching that is appropriate for kids of particular ages, is becoming scandalous.
Right.
Just treating people fairly, being cognizant of inequities that exist and trying to reduce them, valuing diversity. These things are becoming scandalous and controversial and risking termination for educators. And that is, I think it's scary, and I think it is part and parcel of a broader attack on public education and public school teachers and public school students. And But, I think it's really disturbing, and I think the governor should be ashamed of herself. Right. There was nothing objectionable that I found, that I saw. I really recommend checking out the Alabama Reflector's coverage of this. They've done a good job, and they really actually reviewed the book in question and included quite a bit from the book.
Yeah, and let's actually, I want to just go over some of this stuff, because in the Alabama Reflector piece by Gemma Stevenson, they mentioned that the governor's office said they received a complaint about the book teaching about white privilege, structural racism, and messaging promoting equality, dignity, and worth around LGBTQIA plus identities. I'm
sorry, but what is objectionable about equality, right, dignity, and worth around a person's a person's identity? Like,
So here's they say that one passage said that teachers need to be particularly aware of providing supporting environments and responses to children who are members of marginalized groups and those who have been targets of bias and stereotyping. I mean, this is
okay. I mean,
like, that's good.
That's
you need to. This is
just
not
common sense.
Yeah, this is not saying to be left-wing racist towards whites. This is just saying, people have different cultural backgrounds. People face different things when they get home from school. And so be aware of that as you're teaching them, and try to be as effective an educator for them as you can be, and try to, where appropriate, mold your teaching style to the individual student. I mean, this is something that in other circumstances they would absolutely be in favor of individualized lesson planning, and so this book is kind of motioning towards that, and they're pretending to be outraged about it.
And it's just making honest reflections and observations about society. It comments on studies that indicate black students receive much more severe discipline in public schools than white students. That's a fact.
Right. And
I thought facts didn't care about your feelings and all that bullshit. And that's a fact.
In that passage, they don't say, they just mention this fact and say to be aware of it. They do not say, here is this fact, and therefore your disciplinary
take some action A or B or C that is somehow negative towards somebody.
Right, and therefore your disciplinary record ought to reflect exactly the racial proportion of your classroom. Of course, that's not always going to happen, but it's just giving the there's no light without heat. You have to understand the world that you're moving through to be able to move through it in the best way possible. And it's just giving these statistics to the teachers, and saying that, be cognizant of this, right? And it's important to be cognizant of realities.
Right.
There's another passage that discusses structural racism, and the book says, quote, "Early learning settings are one of the central handful of places where children begin to see how they are represented in society. Thus, the early learning setting can be a place of affirmation and healing for children, or it can be a space of trauma, terror, and exclusion. Educators must work to ensure that it is the former." Here again, this is
accurate
and good. Accurate and good.
I mean, you can say, well, there's a pretty broad spectrum between affirmation and healing on one side and trauma, terror, and exclusion on the other.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. There's a lot of territory between those two, poles there. But what is inaccurate about any of that? Mm-hmm. And that is part of the problem, is that being accurate, being truthful, is not a defense against these people, against these manufactured right-wing outrages. And the fusion of culture war with the assault on public institutions, that is part of it, is that they are scared of history and the truth and reality and statistics. These things threaten their reality, threaten their ideology.
when it mentions, and this is really kind of the linchpin, I think, because the recent thing has been attacks on queer folks.
Right.
And so,
absolutely. But especially trans folks, because they found a really small minority to bully and pick on.
Yeah. And so when it's mentioned, when LGBT identities are mentioned, it is a reminder to teachers that families are different. That's the crux of the thing. And the quote from the book is, children from all families, for example, single parent, grandparent led, foster, LGBTQIA+, need to hear and see messages that promote equality, dignity, and worth. How can you object to that? The book goes on to say, quote, providing support and encouragement for personal expression and non-gendered play, that is, honoring children's ideas and choices with respect to gender roles and play, also teaches children acceptance and communicates their value within the classroom community. This is not saying teachers go trans your kids.
Right.
This is saying if a boy student wants to play with a Barbie doll, who gives a shit?
Right. Don't discipline them. Don't
don't
scold
be fucking
them.
weird about it.
Right. Exactly. Let kids play and let them do their thing and figure out, what they're doing. It's so objectionable.
Yeah.
That we have understanding.
Yeah, and the final passage about LGBT stuff says, quote, an affirmation of children's identities is critical because children derive a sense of pride, self-worth, and consistency from their social and cultural identities. For example, including books that explore and celebrate different types of hair, different skin colors, and a range of abilities helps to shape a child's positive self-identity, contributing to feelings of belonging and fostering a sense of care for others. And so it is beneficial not only for students to see themselves represented. If I'm a black student and all I ever see in my classroom is representation of white folks, it may contribute to a feeling of isolation and exclusion, and reasonably so. But also, it is good for the members of the majority to see that they are not the only people that society is not centered around them being white or them being male, or it ought not be, and that other people exist, and we ought to be mindful and respectful of their dignity and equality and worth. And this is the thing that they objected to, and there was one complaint, is my understanding, to the governor's office. From my understanding, a legislator claimed they had a teacher report it to them, a pre-K teacher report this information to them, and the legislator in turn reported it to the governor's office. I mean, this is just really sick stuff, because this means that there's a pre-K teacher out there that saw, hey, you got kids that have gay parents, you got to treat them nice. And was offended by that. Yeah. And let me just say something on this subject. I think it's important that we recognize that as we support workers and we defend workers and we support educators and defend educators, we recognize that they're not all perfect angels, and that there are bigots inside the ranks. Now, I believe there's a difference when you have, bigotry, it matters what access to power they have, right? So a bigot as a principal is, I think more important than a bigot as a teacher, and so on up the scale of authority and power. But, it is a shame that there are still some bigoted folks in the education profession, in Alabama and elsewhere, I'm sure. And I've encountered some over the years, and, probably if you think about it, you probably have too, whoever's listening, and it's a shame. And I think it's a responsibility for educators to organize and educate and try to undo the bigotry and try to respond to it, to call it out when they see it, and to try to paint a different direction. And
educators should be out there sounding the alarms about this action by the governor, and should be defending the concepts of equity and dignity and worth, right? That's worth championing. And, maybe you can call it being a social justice warrior or being woke or whatever, phrase of the day. But I think treating people decently, regardless of who they are, is a pretty fundamental value. Mm-hmm. And that is under attack. And so is teaching the truth. So is acknowledging reality. So is intellectual freedom. These things are under attack. So educators have to organize and band together and be more vocal in standing up against this. And I know it's scary because of the limited rights they have and the retaliation they face and the, overburdened working conditions they experience. I get that. I've been in the trenches and I understand that. But, educators have a responsibility to hold the profession up to a certain standard, and that includes dealing with bigots who are in our ranks. And calling them out when we need to call them out, and re-educating and educating them when we need to and when we can. But I think it's a mistake to cater to that, to say, well, a certain segment of the educators are, not just conservative but outright reactionary and or bigoted, and well, we don't want to offend them. And I think there's a lot of fence riding in the education community, and a lot of folks want to cater to those reactionaries at the expense of their fundamental values.
Yeah. Real gross stuff. Real gross stuff here from...
So, Dr. Cooper, sending you all the best. Even though you've been in management for a long time, I think you're someone who does genuinely want what's best for kids. I cannot say that about the governor or her spokeswoman who put out this garbage statement, or the people who have astroturfed such things like woke concepts.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.